Hey everyone, welcome to History by Morgan. Tonight, we're going way back to explore one of the most legendary cities in human history, Babylon. From its quiet beginnings along the rivers of Mesopotamia to the golden ages of mighty kings, epic laws, and incredible wonders, we'll uncover the story of a city that shaped the world. So get comfortable, relax, and let's step back in time to wander through the rise, glory, and eventual fall of Babylon. Before there was Babylon, before towers, kings, and legends carved into stone, there was land. Quiet land, wide, open, and patient. This story does not begin with a city. It begins with two rivers. Imagine the ancient world long before maps or borders. The sun rises slowly over a flat horizon. The air is warm, almost sleepy. In the distance, water moves gently through the earth as it has for thousands of years. These are the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. They do not rush. They do not speak loudly. They simply flow day after day, shaping the land without asking permission. Between these two rivers lies a stretch of earth the ancient Greeks would later call Mesopotamia, which simply means the land between rivers. It is a place that looks ordinary at first glance. No tall mountains, no deep forests, just soil, sky, and water. But this land held a secret. When the rivers flooded, they left behind rich, dark mud. Soft soil, perfect for growing food, and food changes everything. Before this, humans were always moving, hunting, gathering, following animals, sleeping wherever the night found them. Life was uncertain, hungry, cold, short. But here, between the rivers, people noticed something strange. When seeds fell into the wet soil, plants grew, not just once, but again and again. The land remembered what was planted. So people stayed. They built small homes from mud and reeds, nothing fancy, just enough to keep the wind out. They learned how to guide water into fields using simple canals. They watched the rivers carefully, learning their moods. Too much water could destroy everything. Too little could bring hunger, so they learned balance, slowly, patiently. This was not an empire yet. This was not history as we imagine it. It was survival becoming routine, routine becoming life. Over time, villages grew larger. People no longer lived only for today. They thought about tomorrow, about next year, about storing grain, about protecting land, about rules. And when humans start making rules, civilization is already on the way. One of the first great groups to rise in this land were the Sumerians. They did not arrive suddenly. They emerged slowly, like the rivers themselves. They built some of the world's earliest cities, including Uruk and Ur. These were not cities of stone towers and wide streets. They were crowded, dusty, and alive. Uruk especially was something new, a place where thousands of people lived together. Farmers, builders, traders, priests, people who no longer knew everyone else by name. That alone was a huge change. When a city grows too large for everyone to know each other, new systems must appear. Leadership, law, organization. The Sumerians were good at adapting. They used clay from the riverbanks to make bricks. They stacked them carefully, building homes, walls, and temples. At the center of their city stood tall stepped towers called ziggurats. These were not just buildings. They were bridges between earth and sky. People believed the gods lived above, watching everything, probably judging a little too. Religion was everywhere. The rivers were sacred. The sky was alive. Storms meant anger. Good harvests meant favor. Every city had its own god, and keeping that god happy was serious business. Offerings were made, songs were sung, temples never slept. As cities grew, trade followed. Mesopotamia had rich soil, but it lacked stone, metal, and wood, so people traveled. They traded grain for copper, wool for timber. Ideas moved with goods, stories crossed borders. The world became wider, and then something truly remarkable happened. People began to write. At first, it was simple, a mark to count sheep, a symbol for grain, no poetry, no love letters, just record keeping. But once humans learned how to trap words in symbols, there was no going back. This system became known as cuneiform, made by pressing a reed stylus into soft clay. Wedge-shaped marks, hard to read, even harder to forget. Writing allowed memory to outlive the human mind. Contracts could be enforced. Stories could be preserved. Prayers could be repeated exactly. Civilization gained a voice that time could not easily erase. Not far from the Sumerians, another group rose, the Akkadians. They spoke a different language but shared the same land. Over time, they blended, fought, ruled, and borrowed from each other. This land did not belong to one people. It belonged to whoever could survive it. Empires would rise and fall here, but the pattern was already set. Rivers fed cities. Cities created power. Power demanded order. Order demanded law. Though Babylon had not yet appeared, the ground beneath it was already learning how to carry greatness. Every canal dug, every brick laid, every symbol pressed into clay was practice. The land was preparing. Mesopotamia was not peaceful. Floods destroyed homes. Droughts brought hunger. Invasions came without warning. But hardship forced innovation, and innovation created strength. This place between two rivers taught humans how to live together in large numbers, how to organize time, how to worship, how to trade, how to rule. It was the world's first classroom for civilization. And somewhere in this dusty land, under layers of mud and memory, the future city of Babylon waited. Not yet built, not yet named, but already inevitable. Because once humans learned to build cities here, they were never going to stop. And the greatest city of them all was still to come. The humble beginnings of Babylon was not born famous. There was no grand opening, no cheering crowds, no moment when the world stopped and looked its way. If you were alive in Mesopotamia during Babylon's earliest days, you might not have noticed it at all. It sat quietly along the Euphrates River, just another small settlement made of mud, bricks, and patience. The river flowed past it without any special care, the same way it flowed past hundreds of other villages. To most people, Babylon was simply a place you passed through, not a place you talked about. The earliest written mentions of Babylon are surprisingly dull. Ancient scribes listed it among many other towns with no praise and no warning. Just a name pressed into clay, as if even history itself was unsure whether Babylon would ever matter. And yet the name it carried was anything but small. The people called it Babilu, which means gate of the gods. It sounds powerful, mysterious, almost dramatic. A name like that feels like a promise made too early, because at this point Babylon was no gate to anything divine. It was dusty, crowded, and very human. Babylon began as a minor city under stronger powers. It did not rule, it obeyed. Kings from greater cities claimed it, taxed it, and sometimes ignored it completely. Babylon changed hands more than once, always adapting to whoever was in charge. It learned how to survive without drawing attention. That may not sound impressive, but survival is a skill. The city itself was modest. Low houses made from sun-dried mud bricks lined narrow streets. Roofs were flat, doors were small. Inside, families lived close together, sharing heat in winter and shade in summer. Life was simple but not easy. Most of Babylon's people were farmers. They worked the fertile land near the river, waking early to tend their fields. Barley and wheat were the main crops, and the success of each harvest depended on the river's mood. Too much water meant destruction, too little meant hunger. The river decided, not the people. Others were traders. Babylon's location made trade possible even when power did not. Boats drifted along the Euphrates carrying grain, wool, pottery, and tools. Traders brought stories from distant cities. News traveled faster than armies. Babylon listened carefully. There were also priests, quietly important figures in everyday life. They maintained small temples and shrines, offered prayers, and reminded everyone that the gods were always watching. Religion in early Babylon was not loud or dramatic. It was woven into daily routines, a prayer before work, an offering after a good harvest, a whispered request during hard times. Babylon had no massive temples yet, no towering ziggurat reaching for the sky. Its religious buildings were humble, just like the city itself, but belief was strong. The gods lived in the land, the river, and the stars above. Ignoring them was risky business. Politically, Babylon was weak. It had no powerful army, no famous kings. When wars happened nearby, Babylon usually tried to stay quiet. Sometimes it succeeded. Sometimes it paid the price anyway. But each time the city rebuilt. What Babylon lacked in strength, it made up for in position. The city sat at a natural crossroads of trade routes connecting northern and southern Mesopotamia. Anyone moving goods through the region had a good chance of passing near Babylon. This made it useful, not dominant, but useful cities tend to last. As traders passed through, Babylon absorbed cultures, languages, and ideas. It became familiar with many ways of living. This gave its people a certain flexibility. They learned how to adjust rather than resist, how to cooperate rather than confront. Babylon became good at waiting. Days passed slowly here. The sound of water, animals, and footsteps filled the air. Markets opened with the sun and closed at dusk. Children played in the streets. Elders shared stories of floods, wars, and kings long gone. Life moved forward without urgency. No one in Babylon believed they were living in a future legend. If anything, they saw themselves as ordinary people in an ordinary city, a city that existed because it always had, a city that endured while others rose and fell around it. Some great cities burned brightly and disappeared. Babylon stayed, and that endurance mattered, because while Babylon remained small, it was learning how power worked, learning how cities were managed, learning how laws could control people better than force, learning how religion could unite a population. It watched stronger cities collapse under their own ambition. It saw rulers overreach. It saw systems fail. Babylon remembered these lessons quietly, storing them away like grain. The skyline remained low. No great walls yet, no symbols of glory, just smoke rising from rooftops at sunset, blending into the warm evening air. From the outside, Babylon looked unremarkable. From the inside, it was becoming ready. History often ignores places like this, until suddenly it doesn't, because all it takes is one moment, one leader, one shift in power, and the city that waited becomes the city that rises. That moment was coming closer. Babylon had done its waiting. Everything changed when a single man came to power, a ruler who understood law, order, and ambition, a man who would turn a quiet riverside town into the heart of a kingdom. His name was Hammurabi, and Babylon was about to step out of the shadows. Hammurabi, the king who changed Babylon forever. When Hammurabi came to the throne, Babylon was still not impressive. It was stable, yes. Alive, yes, but powerful, not really. If Babylon were a person, it would still be sitting quietly in the corner, listening to everyone else talk louder. And Hammurabi himself did not arrive as some heroic warrior carved from legend. He was young, inexperienced, and surrounded by enemies who were much stronger than him. Not exactly a dream star. Hammurabi became king around 1792 BCE, inheriting a small kingdom with big problems. Babylon was boxed in by powerful city-states. To the south, there were older and richer cities. To the north and east, aggressive rivals waited for weakness. One wrong move and Babylon could disappear completely. Most kings in this position would rush into war and fail quickly. Hammurabi did not rush. His early years as king were quiet, almost boring, and that was intentional. While others fought and showed off their armies, Hammurabi focused on strengthening Babylon from the inside. He repaired canals, improved agriculture, organized administration, made sure people had food and water. Not exciting stuff, but very smart stuff. A well-fed city does not panic easily. Hammurabi also paid close attention to diplomacy. He made alliances when needed, promised peace when it benefited Babylon, broke promises when it no longer did. This was not kindness, it was strategy. Hammurabi understood something important early on. Wars are expensive and patience is cheaper. For many years, Babylon stayed quiet while its enemies fought each other, and Hammurabi watched. When the time was right, he moved. One by one, Hammurabi launched military campaigns against neighboring city-states. Not all at once, never recklessly. He picked moments when enemies were already weak, distracted, or divided. Babylon's army was not the largest, but it was disciplined and well supported. Logistics mattered, supplies mattered, timing mattered, and slowly Babylon began to win. Cities that once ignored Babylon now feared it. Others surrendered without fighting. Some resisted and fell anyway. Hammurabi did not just conquer land, he absorbed it. He kept local leaders when possible. He respected traditions when useful. He did not rule with constant terror. He ruled with structure. This was new. As Hammurabi expanded, he united much of Mesopotamia under Babylonian rule. For the first time, Babylon was no longer a minor city caught between giants. It was the giant. The political center shifted. Power flowed toward Babylon like the rivers themselves. The city changed. Babylon grew larger. More people arrived. Administrators, soldiers, scribes, craftsmen. New buildings appeared. Roads improved. Markets expanded. Babylon began to feel like a capital, not just a settlement. Decisions made here now affected vast regions. Religion changed too. Babylon's city god, Marduk, rose in importance. As Babylon gained power, so did its god. Other cities were told that Marduk was not just a local deity, but the chief god among gods. This was politics wrapped in belief, and it worked beautifully. Hammurabi understood symbolism. He presented himself not just as a conqueror, but as a protector, a shepherd of his people, chosen by the gods to bring order to chaos. In inscriptions, he spoke calmly, almost gently. He claimed his wars were defensive, his rule just, his intentions pure. Whether that was true or not, people believed it. Under Hammurabi, Babylon became organized in a way it never had before. Taxes were standardized. Officials were appointed. Records were kept carefully. Writing was everywhere. Clay tablets filled with numbers, names, and decisions. Administration became the backbone of the empire, and that is how Babylon held together. because conquest creates empires quickly, but organization keeps them alive. Hammurabi ruled for over 40 years, which was rare. This long reign allowed consistency. Policies could take root. Systems could mature. People grew up knowing only Babylonian rule. Loyalty shifted. Identity changed. Babylon was no longer just a city. It was the heart of Mesopotamia. Yet what made Hammurabi truly different was not how much land he conquered. Plenty of kings conquered land. Many even conquered more. His greatest achievement was not military at all. It was something quieter, something written, not fought. As Hammurabi grew older, he focused less on expansion and more on control. How do you govern millions of people fairly? How do you prevent chaos? How do you make justice predictable instead of personal? Hammurabi believed the answer was law, not spoken law, not remembered law, but written law. Law that could not change depending on mood or status. Law that could be seen, read, and understood. Law that claimed to come from the gods themselves. This idea would define Babylon forever. But that story deserves its own moment. For now, Babylon stood at its peak. Strong walls, busy streets, powerful temples. A king respected and feared across the region. The small riverside town that once waited quietly had become the center of the world, and Hammurabi stood at the center of Babylon. But Hammurabi's greatest legacy was not conquest. It was the law that would echo through history long after his empire faded. The Code of Hammurabi, law, order, and daily life. If Babylon under Hammurabi was impressive for its size and organization, it became truly remarkable because of something quieter, something that would outlast kings, battles, and even empires. The law. Not just any law, but a law written down, carved in stone, meant to guide an entire civilization. This law is what we now call the Code of Hammurabi. Imagine discovering it thousands of years later. A tall black stone, nearly 7 feet high, covered in tiny cuneiform symbols. The top shows Hammurabi standing before a god, receiving authority, and below hundreds of laws, precise and methodical, detailing how Babylonians should live. It was not poetry or philosophy, it was practical, direct, sometimes harsh, always clear. The code is organized in a way that reflects the priorities of the time. Justice was central. People were expected to act honestly, work diligently, and respect authority. Punishments were spelled out for wrongdoing, and they varied depending on the person's social status. Nobles, commoners, and slaves were not treated the same under the law. Society was rigidly structured, but in a way that created predictability. In a chaotic world of floods, war, and uncertainty, predictability was valuable. The phrase, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, is often associated with Hammurabi, and it is part of this code. But it was more than vengeance. It was about balance. If someone injured another person, the punishment was meant to match the harm done, not to exceed it. It sounds strict to modern ears, and it was strict, but the intention was to prevent endless cycles of revenge. Justice, in Hammurabi's mind, had to be visible, fair, or at least understandable. The laws reveal much about daily life in Babylon. They were practical, often surprisingly detailed, covering everything from trade to marriage, from farming to family obligations. They tell us that Babylon was a working city, filled with people whose lives were intertwined through commerce, family, and labor. For example, merchants had rules about contracts and debts. If a trader sold goods and failed to deliver, there were penalties. Builders had responsibilities too. If a house collapsed and killed someone, the builder could be held accountable. Farmers, craftsmen, and even boatmen were mentioned. Law in Babylon wasn't abstract. It was a daily guide for everyone. Women had defined roles under the law. They could own property, run businesses, and inherit in some cases. But they were also expected to respect family and marital obligations. Adultery, divorce, and inheritance disputes were all regulated. Slaves were also covered. Some had protection against mistreatment, though their rights were limited. Laws provided structure in a world where social hierarchy mattered deeply, and everyone knew their place. Families were central. Parents were responsible for children. Children were expected to obey. Marriage contracts were legal documents specifying dowries and responsibilities. Even funerary practices and inheritance were written into law. Life, it seems, was organized from cradle to grave. Perhaps most striking is how the code reflects a society that valued order above chaos. Babylon was surrounded by unpredictable rivers, neighbors who could attack at any moment, and the ever-present uncertainty of survival. Written law turned these uncertainties into something manageable. People knew consequences in advance. Disputes could be resolved without waiting for the whim of a ruler. Even if the laws were not always perfectly fair, they created stability. Every law in Hammurabi's code is like a small window into Babylonian life. One law discusses wages for laborers, how much a builder or a servant should earn. Another sets rules for borrowing and lending. One details what happens if a son insults his father. Every line shows concern for practicality. The society valued accountability and responsibility, and law was the tool to ensure it. The code also demonstrates the blending of religion and governance. Hammurabi claimed that his laws came from Shamash, the sun god of justice. They were divine instructions, not merely human opinions. This religious aspect gave the law moral weight. Breaking a law wasn't just risking punishment, it was potentially angering the gods. In a world where floods, famine, and war were always looming, the gods' approval mattered immensely. Interestingly, while the punishments might seem extreme to modern eyes, they were meant to create predictability and fairness. Injuries, property damage, theft, and false accusations all had set consequences. In a way, the laws were tools to prevent chaos, not just instruments of fear. They were designed so that people could trust each other enough to live together in large numbers, trade, and build. Through the code, Hammurabi effectively created the framework of civilized society. It was not just about punishments or rewards. It was about creating a shared understanding of right and wrong, about teaching citizens what behavior was acceptable and what was dangerous. It made social life manageable, especially in a city growing as fast and complex as Babylon. For everyday Babylonians, the code was probably both reassuring and intimidating. You could know what to expect, and you could follow rules to avoid trouble. On the other hand, a small mistake could have serious consequences, especially for those with less social standing. But rules, when applied consistently, gave life predictability, a rare comfort in ancient Mesopotamia. The code also shows how hierarchy shaped interactions. Different classes, nobles, commoners, slaves, had distinct rights and duties. A noble's theft of property from another noble was punished differently than a commoner stealing from a noble. But importantly, the law still applied. There was accountability, even if it was uneven. This balance kept Babylonian society from collapsing under inequality, at least in the short term. Builders, Traders, farmers, families, women, slaves all existed under the same broad legal umbrella. Life was messy, yes, but the laws offered a structure to manage that messiness. If the river flooded your field, if your neighbor refused to pay a debt, if your house collapsed, the code provided guidance. Hammurabi's code was not perfect. It was harsh. It reflected the values and prejudices of its time, but it was revolutionary. Writing down laws and making them public was a way to extend order across a growing empire. And order in Babylon would become the foundation for prosperity, because with law came predictability. With predictability came trust. With trust came cooperation. And with cooperation came a city capable of greatness. Babylon, which had once been a quiet riverside settlement, now had a framework to manage human life itself. Markets could function. Families could thrive. Builders could construct without constant fear. People could coexist despite differences in wealth, power, and status. Civilization in its early form was breathing here, and it all started with one king's vision. Hammurabi may have been a conqueror. He may have fought battles. He may have expanded borders. But his greatest achievement, the thing that truly changed Babylon forever, was his law. And as we will see, with law came order, and with order came prosperity. The golden age of old Babylon under Hammurabi. Babylon was no longer a quiet riverside town. The small, humble city that had waited patiently for centuries now hummed with life. Streets that once seemed narrow and dusty became bustling pathways for merchants, farmers, priests, and travelers. Babylon was growing, physically, economically, and culturally. It had reached a point that later generations would call its golden age. The population expanded rapidly. Families who had lived there for generations now found themselves living among newcomers from neighboring towns and distant lands. Soldiers who had accompanied Hammurabi's campaigns settled in the city. Traders from far-off regions brought their families, establishing small neighborhoods where languages, customs, and goods mixed. Babylon was becoming a melting pot of human life. People crowded into mud brick homes. Markets overflowed with goods, and the air was always alive with activity. The city was no longer just a place to live. It was a place to experience life. Trade became the heartbeat of Babylon. The Euphrates River, which had once been a quiet companion to farmers and fishermen, now carried boats full of grain, wool, and pottery. Beyond the river, trade routes stretched across Mesopotamia, connecting Babylon to the Mediterranean, the Zagros Mountains, and even distant lands. Goods, ideas, and stories flowed along these paths. A trader arriving from the north could bring copper or tin. One from the south could bring exotic shells or rare dyes. Babylon was no longer isolated. It was a hub of exchange, a city that linked people, cultures, and economies in ways its founders could never have imagined. Agriculture, the foundation of Babylonian life, also flourished. Hammurabi and his administrators invested in irrigation systems, canals, and water management. The Euphrates' unpredictable floods were tamed, channeled carefully into fields and gardens. Farmers could now plant and harvest with some confidence, producing enough grain to feed the city and export the surplus. The canals not only nourished the crops, but also provided transportation, carrying goods and people along the waterways with surprising efficiency. The land that had once dictated life to humans was now being guided, shaped, and cultivated to support a growing empire. With growth came knowledge. Education flourished in Babylon. Schools trained scribes who could read and write cuneiform, the language of administration, trade, and record-keeping. Scribes became the lifeblood of the city, recording everything from tax collections to grain shipments to legal disputes. They were highly respected, for in a world without literacy, the written word held immense power. Babylon schools taught mathematics, astronomy, and literature, ensuring that the next generation could continue the work of governance, trade, and culture. Learning was a practical pursuit, but also a symbol of civilization itself, proof that Babylon was no longer a simple village, but a center of knowledge and planning. Religion remained central to daily life. Temples dedicated to Marduk, the chief god of Babylon, rose higher and larger than ever before. People gathered for rituals, festivals, and offerings, honoring the gods and seeking their favor. Priests maintained the temples, performed ceremonies, and advised rulers. Religion was not separate from the city. It wove through every aspect of life, from law to agriculture to personal matters. The towering temples reminded everyone every day that Babylon was under divine watch and that prosperity was intertwined with piety. The economy, culture, and religion all converged to make Babylon a remarkable urban hub. Markets were crowded with merchants selling spices, cloth, pottery, and metalwork. Craftsmen worked tirelessly in workshops, producing goods for both local use and distant trade. Roads led to neighboring cities, while canals connected neighborhoods within Babylon itself. Public spaces, though modest, allowed people to gather, exchange news, and celebrate. The city was alive, vibrant, and meticulously organized. Even the ordinary life of a Babylonian citizen was shaped by the city's infrastructure. Farmers delivered surplus grain to storage facilities. Merchants navigated marketplaces full of color and noise, and children attended early lessons in schools run by scribes. People lived in a world that combined practicality with aspiration, where daily routines were both necessary and meaningful. Every street, canal, and temple played a role in sustaining life, making Babylon more than just a city. It was an ecosystem, a well-oiled machine of human activity. Hammurabi's vision for Babylon extended beyond mere survival or wealth. He understood that a prosperous city required order and coordination. His administration ensured that water, food, law, and trade functioned smoothly. The Code of Hammurabi continued to guide daily interactions, providing stability in a growing, bustling metropolis. People felt the effects of law in practical ways. Disputes were mediated, contracts enforced, and property protected. Order allowed for creativity, productivity, and confidence. Citizens could plan for the future, knowing the city had mechanisms to support them. Culturally, Babylon shone brightly. Literature, myths, and stories circulated widely. Festivals celebrated gods, seasonal changes, and achievements of the city. Music, poetry, and ritual infused the city's streets, blending with the hum of daily life. Babylon was becoming not just a center of trade or administration, but a cultural beacon, a city that shaped the imagination of its inhabitants and neighbors alike. This was truly the golden age of Old Babylon, a city thriving in multiple dimensions: growth, wealth, education, religion, culture, and law intertwined seamlessly. Citizens experienced a life that balanced practical needs with social structure, faith, and ambition. Trade, both local and long distance, brought new ideas and goods, while agriculture and irrigation sustained the population. Knowledge flourished in scribe schools, and religion maintained a moral and spiritual framework. Babylon was more than a city under Hammurabi. It was the heart of Mesopotamia. Its influence reached beyond its walls, shaping neighboring regions and laying foundations for future empires. Every canal, road, temple, and school was a testament to the city's careful organization and strategic growth. The Golden Age was not just about wealth or conquest. It was about creating a functioning, sustainable civilization, capable of enduring long after the king who started it was gone. Yet, as with all golden ages, there was a quiet tension beneath the surface. For all its prosperity, Babylon was not immune to change, challenge, or decline. Rivers could flood unexpectedly. Neighbors could rise again in power. Leadership could falter. The city's success was immense but fragile, balanced delicately on careful planning, law, and the energy of its people. Even in this age of splendor, time whispered its inevitability, and history has a way of reminding even the greatest cities that nothing lasts forever. Yet no golden age lasts forever. Decline after Hammurabi. The first fall of Babylon, even the brightest light eventually dims. Hammurabi, the king who had transformed Babylon from a humble riverside town into the beating heart of Mesopotamia, did not live forever. After over 40 years of rule, he passed away. His death was a quiet moment in history, but it left a loud vacuum. The man who had provided direction, law, and stability was gone, and the city he had shaped suddenly felt exposed. His successors were not Hammurabi. They lacked his vision, his patience, and his decisiveness. Some were too young, others were inexperienced. A few may have been well-meaning but timid. Whatever the reason, Babylon's leadership after Hammurabi struggled to maintain control. The carefully constructed systems that had kept the city thriving began to falter under weak hands. Internal instability soon followed. Factions within the royal court vied for influence. Nobles disagreed over policies. Scribes, priests, and administrators found their roles shifting as priorities changed from one ruler to the next. Laws that had been strictly enforced under Hammurabi were now applied inconsistently. Citizens noticed. Some grew frustrated. Others grew bold. In a city that had once functioned like clockwork, disorder slowly crept in. Babylon's prosperity made it a target. Envious neighbors watched the city's decline and waited. One of the most devastating threats came from the north, the Hittites. Known for their skill in warfare and sudden raids, they invaded Mesopotamia. Babylon, now weakened and divided internally, could not defend itself as it once had. In a swift and brutal campaign, the Hittites breached the city, looting treasures, destroying temples, and shattering the sense of security that Hammurabi had carefully built. The sack of Babylon was shocking. For a city that had once seemed untouchable, it was a humiliating blow. Citizens fled or were killed, trade routes were disrupted, and agricultural production suffered. The Euphrates, which had long been Babylon's lifeline, carried not only boats full of grain and goods, but also the rumor of disaster. The city that had been a shining example of organization, culture, and prosperity suddenly appeared vulnerable and fragile. In the years following the invasion, Babylon struggled to recover. Rebuilding was slow. Population growth stagnated. Some districts were abandoned. The grandeur of the temples, the hustle of the markets, and the disciplined flow of everyday life all faded, leaving only echoes of a once golden age. Citizens who remembered Hammurabi's reign may have sighed at the changes, longing for the order that had seemed permanent but was, after all, tied to one man's strength. Despite the setbacks, Babylon did not disappear. It remained on maps and in memory, a city of past glory. Travelers passing through might still remark on its temples, its streets, or its history. Yet in the grand story of Mesopotamia, Babylon had temporarily faded into the background, overshadowed by stronger powers, distracted neighbors, and the shifting tides of politics. This period of decline shows something important about human civilization. Even the best systems rely on leadership. Hammurabi had built order, law, and culture, but when the person at the center was gone, the structures proved vulnerable. Babylon's fall was not due to the failure of its citizens, canals, or laws, but because stability is fragile, and power without continuity can vanish as quickly as it appears. It also highlights the unpredictable nature of history. Babylon had risen slowly, patiently, through careful organization, diplomacy, and law. And yet, in the absence of strong guidance, everything changed. The city that once symbolized Mesopotamia might now had to endure humiliation and uncertainty. During this time, the surrounding regions did not wait politely. The Hittites had left their mark, but other groups were also eager to assert dominance. Regional powers shifted constantly. Babylon became a pawn in larger conflicts, losing influence as new rulers took control. The city endured, but its golden age, the period of growth, trade, learning, and culture, was behind it. For the people living in Babylon at the time, daily life was harder. Markets were less reliable. Floods disrupted agriculture without strong management. Temples were rebuilt, but the spiritual confidence of the city had been shaken. Yet even in this weakened state, Babylon's legacy lingered. The memory of Hammurabi's laws, the canals he had built, and the knowledge preserved by scribes provided a foundation for the city's eventual resurgence. The rivers still flowed, carrying life and trade. The land remained fertile, even if its harvests were smaller. The city's location, once strategic for commerce and culture, continued to make it a point of interest for future rulers. Babylon's decline was severe, but not permanent. History often unfolds like a long river. Just as the Euphrates meanders, floods, and changes course, so too do cities rise and fall. Babylon had experienced greatness, and now it was experiencing vulnerability. Its story was far from over. The city was learning, in its own quiet way, how to survive beyond the life of one great king. And so, even as Babylon's market slowed, temples stood damaged and the population shrank, the city remained alive. Its streets echoed with memory. Its canals still carried water. Its walls, though scarred, still protected what remained. The first fall of Babylon was a pause, a breath, a reminder that even greatness is not guaranteed. Yet in the grand sweep of history, decline is never the final chapter. Babylon, after all, had survived floods, invasions, and political turmoil before. Its people were resilient. Its location remained strategic. Its legacy, laws, culture, religion, was embedded deeply in Mesopotamian life. And somewhere beneath the layers of mud, memory, and ruin, the city waited for the next moment of greatness. Because Babylon, though diminished, was not finished, and the story would continue. The Kassite revival, Babylon reborn after the turbulence that followed Hammurabi's death. Babylon seemed fragile. The city that had once ruled Mesopotamia with law and order had been humbled. Its streets, temples, and markets bore the scars of invasion. And yet, as history often shows, Cities with strong foundations do not stay down forever. Slowly, quietly, Babylon began to rise again. This revival came under the Kassite rulers, a people from the Zagros Mountains to the east. The Kassites were not famous conquerors in the way Hammurabi had been. They did not leave behind dramatic tales of war or towering monuments. Instead, they ruled steadily, patiently, and with remarkable consistency. Babylon, once battered and diminished, found in the Kassites a leadership that valued stability above spectacle. For several centuries, Babylon experienced a long period of calm and order under Kassite rule. Unlike the rapid expansion and ambition of Hammurabi's time, the Kassites focused on maintaining what was already built. Canals were repaired and improved. Roads connected neighborhoods and nearby towns. Markets functioned reliably. Temples were maintained with care. Schools continued to educate scribes. Life in Babylon returned to a rhythm that was reassuring to its citizens. During this era, Babylonian culture was carefully preserved. Even though the Kassites were newcomers, they adopted Babylonian traditions rather than replacing them. The language, writing, religious practices, and legal systems of the older city were maintained. Scribes continued to copy texts, festivals continued to be celebrated, and knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, and administration was passed from generation to generation. Babylon's identity endured, even as its rulers changed. Temples, which had suffered during earlier invasions, were gradually restored and expanded. Marduk's cult regained prominence, and rituals continued with devotion and care. Priests oversaw festivals, ceremonies, and offerings, ensuring that religious life remained central to the city. Even if Babylon no longer commanded vast territories or armies, it became a religious heart for Mesopotamia. Pilgrims visited, paying homage to the gods and observing the city's rich traditions. Religion provided a continuity that secular power could not always guarantee. The Kassite period also emphasized practical governance. Unlike kings who sought fame through conquest, Kassite rulers sought longevity through order. They maintained city walls, collected taxes efficiently, and oversaw agricultural production. Farmers, traders, and artisans found their work predictable. There was stability in the rhythm of daily life. The canals brought water to fields, markets opened reliably, and religious festivals followed the lunar calendar. Babylon became a place where people could live with confidence, knowing that their city would continue to function regardless of the larger political climate. Even without a sprawling empire, Babylon retained its cultural influence. It became a center for writing, scholarship, and religion. Scribes copied texts not only for administrative purposes, but also for learning and preservation. Knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, and literature continued to grow. Scholars studied ancient laws, recorded traditions, and ensured that the legacy of Hammurabi and earlier kings was not forgotten. Babylon's influence extended quietly, through culture and religion rather than military power. Trade persisted as well, though at a different scale than during Hammurabi's reign. Merchants continued to move goods along the Euphrates and across Mesopotamia. Babylon remained a waypoint for traders, travelers, and diplomats. Its reputation as a reliable, organized city made it attractive, even in a time when other powers dominated militarily. The city's economic life thrived quietly, not in dazzling bursts, but steadily and sustainably. Life in Babylon during the Kassite period reflected a balance of tradition and practicality. Families tended their fields, craftsmen worked in their shops, and children learned to read and write. Temples were not only places of worship, but also centers of education and social life. Markets, though less crowded than during the peak of Hammurabi's reign, offered goods and connections that tied the city to the wider world. Every aspect of life was calm, structured, and predictable, an echo of the Golden Age, reshaped by experience and careful stewardship. This era also demonstrated the resilience of Babylonian identity. Despite invasions, political change, and the passage of time, the city maintained its distinct character. Festivals celebrated ancient gods. Laws and customs rooted in Hammurabi's code persisted in daily life. Buildings were repaired rather than razed. Knowledge was copied and preserved. Babylon was, in a sense, reborn from its own memory, guided by rulers who understood that the strength of a city lay not only in armies, but in the continuity of culture, religion, and governance. The Kassite revival reminds us that history is not always about conquest or spectacular monuments. Sometimes, the quiet endurance of institutions, traditions, and daily life shapes the longevity of a city more than any battle ever could. Babylon, under the Kassites, became a living example of this principle. It thrived not through fear or glory, but through careful management, respect for tradition, and steady governance. Even as centuries passed, the Kassite rulers ensured that Babylon remained central to Mesopotamian civilization. Temples and schools, canals and markets, law and ritual all continued to function. Citizens could trust their leaders to maintain the city and its ways. Babylon may not have dominated empires, but it dominated minds and hearts through culture, religion, and daily stability. And so, Babylon endured. It endured as a city of the past, a city of learning, and a city of faith. The scars of invasion and decline remained, but they did not define the city's identity. The canals still carried water, the temples still called to worshipers, the scribes still wrote, and in doing so, Babylon quietly prepared for the next chapter of its long, extraordinary story. Centuries passed, and new powers rose around Babylon. Kingdoms, empires, and conquerors came and went. The Euphrates flowed steadily through the city, as it always had, carrying news, trade, and travelers. Babylon remained, a calm and enduring presence, a city rooted in its past yet ready for the future, because the story of Babylon was far from over. Assyrians and Babylonians, rivals and enemies, even as Babylon thrived quietly under the Kassites. The wider world of Mesopotamia was changing. To the north, a new power was rising, the Assyrian Empire. Fierce, ambitious, and well-organized, the Assyrians were unlike any neighbor Babylon had faced before. They were warriors, builders, and conquerors, and their influence would shape Babylon's destiny for centuries to come. Assyria grew steadily, stretching its control over northern Mesopotamia and beyond. Their kings were known for military skill, strict discipline, and ambition that often bordered on ruthlessness. They built formidable armies, imposing fortresses, and administrative systems that allowed them to govern large regions efficiently. To Babylon, the Assyrians were both a threat and a challenge, a looming presence that could not be ignored. Babylon, meanwhile, was no stranger to power struggles. Its people were resilient, its culture rich, and its traditions deep. But under the shadow of Assyria, Babylon's autonomy became limited. Assyrian rulers often imposed governors, demanded tribute, and expected loyalty. Babylonian kings had to navigate a delicate balance. Cooperate too little and risk destruction. Cooperate too much and lose prestige at home. It was a tense and exhausting position for a city that had known glory in its own right. The tension between Babylon and Assyria led to frequent rebellions and revolts. Babylonian leaders and citizens alike were proud of their heritage and wary of foreign domination. Occasionally, kings would attempt to assert independence, and citizens would rise in protest. These rebellions were risky. Assyrian responses were harsh. Cities could be attacked, leaders executed, and neighborhoods razed. Yet despite repeated defeats, the Babylonian spirit persisted. Resistance became part of the city's identity, a quiet insistence that Babylon would never fully bow to external powers. Destruction and rebuilding became a recurring pattern. Assyrians would punish, Babylon would repair. Temples were restored, canals rebuilt, and markets reopened. Life went on, and daily routines continued even amid the upheaval. Farmers returned to their fields, traders resumed their journeys along the Euphrates, and scribes recorded events on clay tablets. Babylon became a city accustomed to resilience, learning that endurance was as important as strength. The contrast between Assyrians and Babylonians went beyond politics and warfare. Cultural differences were stark. Assyrians valued conquest, discipline, and military achievement above all else. They celebrated strength and feared weakness. Babylon, in contrast, cherished law, tradition, religion, and intellectual life. Where Assyrians built palaces and fortresses, Babylonians built temples, schools, and canals. The two peoples approached life differently, and this difference fueled both admiration and friction. These cultural contrasts also played out in governance. Assyrians often imposed their officials and laws, while Babylonians clung to their own customs and traditions. Local priests, scribes, and administrators preserved Babylonian ways as much as possible, ensuring that daily life retained its familiar rhythms. Even under Assyrian influence, Babylon's identity remained intact. Its citizens continued festivals, worshipped Marduk, and followed long-standing social practices. This subtle form of resistance ensured that Babylon's soul endured, even when its political power did not. Babylon's geography added another layer to the story. The Euphrates River, which had been a source of wealth and sustenance, also served as a natural defense. Canals and walls provided some protection, making total conquest difficult. Assyrian armies could strike, destroy, and intimidate, but rebuilding was always possible. Babylon's citizens were patient, knowing that rivers could be redirected, walls repaired, and life resumed once invaders left. The city's resilience became legendary. Stories circulated of kings who had dared to defy Assyrian overlords, only to watch Babylon rise again after destruction. Temples were rebuilt with even greater care, canals were strengthened, and scribes meticulously recorded the city's history. Babylon learned from each cycle of conflict, growing wiser, more organized, and more deliberate in its approach to both politics and survival. Despite the hardships, Babylon maintained its status as a cultural and religious hub. Scholars continued to study mathematics, astronomy, and literature. Festivals honored gods and reinforced community ties. Temples acted as centers of both worship and education. Babylon's identity was reinforced by the very practices that made it different from its northern neighbors. While Assyria projected power through fear and conquest, Babylon projected influence through culture, religion, and enduring civic structures. Over time, Babylon's people internalized a quiet truth. Survival was a form of strength. You did not always need to conquer. Sometimes you waited, rebuilt, and preserved. And by doing so, you kept the flame of civilization alive. Babylon became a city of resilience and memory, where every wall, canal, and tablet testified to centuries of endurance. The long-term conflict with Assyria shaped more than politics. It shaped the Babylonian psyche. Citizens became skilled at compromise and negotiation. Leaders learned to balance pride with pragmatism. Society adapted to uncertainty, finding ways to thrive despite instability. And through it all, Babylonian culture endured, outlasting the empires that sought to dominate it. The relationship between Babylon and Assyria would continue for generations. There were periods of relative peace, times of harsh domination, and repeated cycles of rebellion and suppression. Each encounter left scars, but also lessons. Babylon became a city that understood the dynamics of power, the limits of military might, and the enduring value of culture, law, and religion. Even under Assyrian dominance, Babylon waited, always aware of its own history, its past greatness. The Golden Age under Hammurabi, the Kassite stability, the preservation of traditions, reminded its citizens that the city had survived worse, and it would survive again. Babylon's story was not over, because eventually Babylon would have its revenge. The Neo-Babylonian Empire, a second golden age after centuries of struggle, Babylon's moment had finally returned. The once humbled city, long overshadowed by neighbors, foreign rulers, and invading armies, was about to rise again. The power of the Assyrians, which had loomed over Mesopotamia for generations, was finally crumbling. Their empire, once fierce and dominant, was overextended and weakened by internal strife and rebellion. Babylon, patient and resilient, was ready to reclaim its place in the world. At the heart of this revival was Nabopolassar, a skilled and determined leader who became king of Babylon in 626 BCE. He was not just a military strategist, but also a statesman who understood the importance of timing and alliances. Nabopolassar seized the opportunity presented by Assyria's weakness. With patience and cunning, he began to consolidate power, rallying allies and inspiring loyalty among the city's citizens. Under his leadership, Babylon was no longer a city struggling to survive. It was becoming a kingdom ready to dominate. Nabopolassar's first major achievement was regaining independence for Babylon. For decades, the city had been under Assyrian influence, its autonomy restricted, its pride subdued. Now, through careful diplomacy and military action, Babylon freed itself from foreign control. The Euphrates, which had seen so many invasions, now carried the news of victory and liberation. Citizens rejoiced as the city, once again, controlled its own destiny. Independence breathed life into every street, marketplace, and temple. Pride surged in the hearts of Babylonians, long accustomed to resilience rather than glory. With independence secured, Nabopolassar began forming the Neo-Babylonian Empire, laying the foundations for what would become Babylon's most famous era. He strengthened the military, rebuilt fortifications, and reinforced the city's defenses. Strategic alliances with neighboring states ensured that Babylon was protected from immediate threats, while careful administration revived trade, agriculture, and governance. The city was no longer merely surviving. It was preparing to thrive on a scale previously unimaginable. One of the most significant aspects of this second golden age was the renewal of pride and culture. After centuries of foreign domination and internal upheaval, Babylonian identity flourished. Temples were restored and expanded. Scholars and scribes resumed their work with renewed energy, copying texts, recording history, and studying mathematics, astronomy, and literature. Festivals and religious ceremonies were celebrated with grandeur, reminding citizens of their heritage and strengthening social cohesion. The city's architecture reflected confidence and ambition. Towering walls, intricate palaces, and majestic temples signaled a return to prominence. Trade and commerce flourished once again. Babylon's strategic location along the Euphrates and its connections to surrounding regions allowed goods, ideas, and people to flow freely. Merchants brought textiles, metals, and exotic goods from distant lands. Farmers supplied abundant harvests to feed the city and support export. Markets buzzed with activity, and the city's economy reflected the prosperity and stability achieved under Nabopolassar's leadership. Babylon was no longer a quiet, cautious city. It was a bustling hub of commerce and culture. The Neo-Babylonian Empire also emphasized religion and symbolism as a source of authority and unity. Marduk, the city's patron god, regained supreme importance, and temples dedicated to him became focal points of civic life. Nabopolassar presented himself as chosen by the gods, a leader responsible not only for the city's political success, but also for its spiritual well-being. Religion intertwined with governance, reinforcing loyalty among citizens and projecting power to neighboring regions. In Babylon, law, culture, and faith coexisted, creating a harmonious framework for society. This period marked a significant return to grandeur and influence. Babylon, once a city forced to survive under foreign rule, now became the dominant power in Mesopotamia. Its citizens experienced stability, pride, and prosperity on a scale that surpassed even the memory of Hammurabi's golden age. Temples, palaces, and canals were rebuilt with care and ambition. Scholars and scribes worked diligently, preserving knowledge while advancing learning. Markets thrived, and trade routes once again flowed through the city, bringing wealth, ideas, and influence. The Neo-Babylonian Empire was not only a revival of power, but also a demonstration of strategic patience and resilience. The city had learned that survival required more than military might. It required law, culture, governance, and faith. Nabopolassar embodied this understanding, guiding Babylon toward a balance between authority, tradition, and ambition. Citizens could live, work, and worship with confidence, knowing their city had regained strength and security. Under Nabopolassar, Babylon once again became a symbol of civilization. Its influence extended far beyond its walls. Neighboring kingdoms recognized its resurgence. Traders and travelers spoke of its renewed prosperity. Scholars and priests continued traditions that preserved knowledge and culture, ensuring that Babylon remained a beacon of Mesopotamian achievement. The city's reputation, built over centuries, was now restored and enhanced. Even the physical city reflected this revival. Walls and fortifications were strengthened to protect against invasions. Canals and irrigation systems ensured agricultural abundance. Markets and neighborhoods thrived, providing citizens with the resources needed to sustain daily life. Palaces and temples were not just functional, they were statements of ambition, resilience, and cultural pride. Babylon, which had survived so much turmoil, now displayed confidence and sophistication. This second golden age under Nabopolassar laid the groundwork for future greatness. While he would not live to see all of Babylon's triumphs, his leadership restored the city's independence, rebuilt its infrastructure, and renewed its cultural and religious significance. Citizens once again looked to Babylon not as a city surviving in the shadow of others, but as a center of power, faith, and identity. And this revival, steady and deliberate, set the stage for a king who would define Babylon in ways no one had before. A ruler whose name would echo through history, whose achievements would inspire awe, and whose reign would represent the pinnacle of Babylonian power. Because the story of Babylon's resurgence under Nabopolassar was only the beginning. And then came Babylon's greatest king, Nebuchadnezzar II. The builder king, if Nabopolassar revived Babylon, it was his son, Nebuchadnezzar II, who transformed the city into something legendary. The young king inherited an empire poised for greatness, but he did more than inherit. It was as if he wanted to leave a permanent mark on the world. Under his rule, Babylon would not just be powerful, it would become a marvel admired for centuries. Nebuchadnezzar first proved himself on the battlefield. He was a skilled military leader, expanding Babylonian control across Mesopotamia and beyond. Cities that had once been independent or rebellious were brought into the empire, often through a combination of force and diplomacy. Armies marched across the Fertile Crescent, securing trade routes, subduing rivals, and demonstrating the might of Babylonian rule. Each victory not only expanded the empire's territory, but also reinforced Nebuchadnezzar's authority at home. Citizens could feel the empire's power radiating from their own walls, a sense of security and pride swelling as the Euphrates flowed past their homes. But Nebuchadnezzar was more than a conqueror. He was a builder, a visionary who reshaped Babylon in ways that would be remembered for millennia. One of his first priorities was fortification. He expanded and strengthened the city's walls, turning Babylon into a nearly impregnable stronghold. Towering gates, massive walls, and defensive canals were constructed to protect against invaders. The city was a fortress, but it was also beautiful. Carefully planned streets, grand entrances, and ceremonial gateways reflected the empire's power and artistry. The most famous of these was the Ishtar Gate, a stunning blue brick portal adorned with lions, dragons, and mythical creatures. It was not only practical, but also a bold statement. Babylon was a city of gods and kings, and it would be remembered. Palaces and temples were built or restored with grandeur. Nebuchadnezzar invested heavily in architecture, commissioning massive structures that reflected both wealth and devotion. Palaces were opulent, featuring courtyards, gardens, and intricate decorations. Temples honored Babylonian gods, particularly Marduk, emphasizing the divine authority behind the king's rule. Religion and power intertwined seamlessly. Every brick, every relief, every inscription was a reminder that Babylon's greatness was both earthly and heavenly. Agriculture and infrastructure also benefited from Nebuchadnezzar's vision. Canals were expanded, irrigation improved, and granaries constructed to support a growing population. Farmers could rely on a stable water supply, ensuring the city's food security. Markets flourished, crafts thrived, and trade routes carried Babylonian goods across the region. The city was not just a center of power, it was a well-oiled machine where military strength, culture, religion, and economy worked together in harmony. One of Nebuchadnezzar's most famous accomplishments, though some still debate the details, is the creation of the Hanging Gardens, said to be built for his queen, who missed the green hills of her homeland. Whether the gardens existed exactly as described or not, the story reflects the king's ambition to combine beauty with power, to create a city that dazzled the senses and inspired awe. Babylon was not only fortified and functional, it was enchanting, a place where architecture, nature, and imagination intertwined. Under Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon's streets were vibrant with life. Citizens walked along canals lined with shops and homes. Markets overflowed with goods from across the empire. Scholars, scribes, and priests carried on traditions of learning and worship. Temples hosted festivals that drew visitors from afar. The Euphrates flowed through a city that was at once practical, secure, and beautiful, a hub of civilization in every sense. Nebuchadnezzar's empire extended beyond the city walls, but he always emphasized Babylon itself as the jewel of his realm. Citizens could feel the king's presence not only through his victories, but also in the grandeur surrounding them. Buildings, walls, temples, and public spaces reminded everyone of their city's glory and their place within a powerful civilization. Life was ordered, impressive, and inspiring, reflecting the vision of a king who saw Babylon not only as a seat of power, but also as a symbol of human achievement. Military victories, while crucial, were complemented by administration and infrastructure. Nebuchadnezzar ensured that conquered territories contributed to the empire's strength through taxes, trade, and labor, but he also integrated local practices, allowing cities and regions to maintain some identity while supporting the larger state. This approach strengthened loyalty and reduced rebellion, ensuring that Babylon remained the heart of a sprawling, diverse empire. The king's construction projects left an enduring legacy. The city became famous for its massive walls, grand gates, palaces, temples, and possibly the legendary gardens. Canals and irrigation systems provided water and commerce. Scholars continued to study mathematics, astronomy, and law. Festivals, rituals, and civic life flourished. Babylon was no longer just a city. It was a symbol of human ingenuity, resilience, and ambition. Every brick Nebuchadnezzar laid, every wall he strengthened, every temple he rebuilt told a story. Babylon had returned to greatness. The city's streets, canals, and markets reflected not only wealth but also stability. Citizens could live with confidence, work with purpose, and worship with devotion. The king had transformed Babylon into a place where the past's lessons of resilience met the present's prosperity, creating an environment capable of inspiring awe for generations. Nebuchadnezzar's reign also reflected the fusion of power and culture. Military strength, strategic planning, and governance ensured the city's dominance, while architecture, religion, and urban design projected majesty and permanence. Babylon became a model for cities across Mesopotamia, a place where security, prosperity, faith, and culture coexisted in harmony. By the end of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Babylon had achieved something remarkable. It was no longer merely a city. It was the greatest city on earth, a marvel of human achievement. Its influence extended across Mesopotamia, inspiring awe, admiration, and sometimes fear. The Euphrates flowed past a city that was fortified, functional, beautiful, and alive. A place that combined human ambition with divine approval in a way few others had ever achieved. And so, Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar became a legendary city, remembered not only for its power, but also for its beauty, culture, and resilience. It was a testament to the vision of one man and the perseverance of a people who had survived centuries of rise, fall, and revival. Nebuchadnezzar's accomplishments ensured that Babylon would be celebrated long after his death, immortalized in stories, inscriptions, and imagination. Because under Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon became a wonder of the world, the magnificent city. Walls, gates, and temples imagine walking into Babylon at the height of its glory under Nebuchadnezzar Roman II. From afar, the first thing you would notice is the immense wall encircling the city. It wasn't just any wall. These were thick, towering fortifications, designed to impress and intimidate. Some sections were wide enough to allow chariots to ride side by side. They stretched for miles, encircling the city like a protective embrace. These walls were more than defense. They were a statement. Babylon was powerful, proud, and nearly impossible to conquer. As you approached the city, your eyes would be drawn to the Ishtar Gate, a masterpiece of color and design. The deep blue bricks gleamed in the sunlight, adorned with reliefs of lions, dragons, and mythical creatures. The gate was part of a ceremonial entrance that led onto the processional way, a broad street lined with walls decorated in the same vibrant motifs. During festivals, statues and citizens would parade along this avenue, carrying offerings and celebrating the gods. Walking along it, you would feel the grandeur of the city pressing in from all sides, a mixture of awe, reverence, and pride. Inside the walls, the city was alive with palaces, temples, and bustling streets. The king's palace rose with multiple courtyards, gardens, and grand halls. The air carried the scent of incense from temples, the chatter of merchants, and the clatter of craftsmen at work. Streets were organized yet busy. Canals ran through the city supplying water for agriculture, homes, and public use, and markets overflowed with goods from across the empire. Babylon was meticulously planned, but it also had energy, a city teeming with human life, devotion, and ambition. The temples were particularly striking. Marduk's temple towered above all, its ziggurat rising in steps toward the sky, a reminder of the connection between gods and people. Smaller temples dedicated to other deities dotted the city, each with its own priests, rituals, and festivals. These spaces were not only spiritual centers, they were cultural hubs, places for education, administration, and social gathering. Citizens moved through these temples as part of their daily lives, offering prayers, attending ceremonies, and observing religious festivals that punctuated the year. Daily life in Babylon was a rich tapestry. Farmers delivered their goods to market stalls, where traders sold everything from grain and pottery to exotic spices and textiles. Children learned to read and write under the guidance of scribes, copying cuneiform tablets with careful precision. Craftsmen carved statues, worked metal, and wove intricate fabrics. The streets buzzed with conversation, laughter, bargaining, and the occasional argument. Despite the city's grandeur, there was a sense of intimacy. People lived, worked, and worshipped side by side, bound together by the rhythms of daily life. Markets were particularly vibrant. Imagine walking past stalls laden with colorful cloth, fragrant spices, fresh fruits, and baked goods. Traders shouted their prices, while buyers haggled, each negotiation a tiny performance of commerce and skill. Exotic goods arrived from distant lands: lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, cedar from Lebanon, tin from Anatolia. The marketplace was not just an economic hub. It was a place where ideas, stories, and culture were exchanged alongside goods. Babylon thrived on this exchange, both material and social, weaving the fabric of a dynamic, prosperous city. Festivals brought the city to life in another way. Processions along the processional way, dances, music, and ritual ceremonies filled the streets with color and sound. Priests, citizens, and even the king participated in celebrations that honored gods, seasonal cycles, and military victories. These festivals reminded everyone of their place in the cosmic and civic order, reinforcing the connection between the people, their city, and their deities. For a visitor, it was impossible not to be swept up in the spectacle, a city alive with devotion, joy, and pride. Canals threaded through the city like veins, carrying water, goods, and people. Bridges spanned these waterways, linking neighborhoods and marketplaces. Boats ferried grain from the countryside into the city and transported merchandise for trade. Water management was both practical and symbolic. It reminded citizens that Babylon's rulers cared for the city's well-being, and that the land itself, harnessed and guided, could sustain civilization. Even the ordinary homes and neighborhoods reflected the city's careful planning. Streets were narrow but navigable. Homes were clustered around courtyards, and small gardens provided greenery and food. Life was structured yet vibrant. Citizens could navigate the city safely and efficiently, enjoying the benefits of a large, organized metropolis without losing the sense of community that smaller cities offered. Babylon's architectural achievements were more than practical. They were statements of power, pride, and identity. Every wall, gate, temple, and palace carried meaning. The Ishtar Gate symbolized protection and divine favor. The temples reflected devotion and continuity. Palaces expressed authority, wealth, and taste. Together, these structures created an urban landscape that was functional, beautiful, and inspiring. Walking through Babylon was like moving through a living story of human achievement, history, and culture. Even in quiet moments, the city radiated presence. At dawn, the sun reflected off blue-glazed walls, highlighting the intricate reliefs. At midday, markets bustled with trade and conversation. In the evening, lamps illuminated courtyards, temples, and streets, casting a warm glow over the city as citizens returned home. Life, work, devotion, and leisure blended seamlessly, making Babylon not just a place to live, but a city to experience. The magnificence of Babylon was not just in its buildings or walls. It was in the totality of life within them. The canals, gates, temples, palaces, markets, and festivals all worked together to create a city that was more than the sum of its parts. Babylon was functional, beautiful, sacred, and human all at once, a marvel in every sense. And yet, among all these wonders, one story has captured the imagination more than any other. A legend of hanging gardens, lush greenery, and a king's devotion. A story that has traveled through time, whispering of love, ambition, and beauty. Among these wonders, one legend stands above all: the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Myth or reality? If Babylon was a city of walls, gates, and temples, then the Hanging Gardens were its whisper of magic. Unlike walls that defended or palaces that displayed power, the gardens suggested something different: beauty, imagination, and perhaps even love. Travelers from across the ancient world wrote about them, describing terraces that seemed to float above the city, overflowing with greenery, flowers, and even flowing water. But the mystery begins here. Did they exist at all? Ancient writers, from Greek historians to later chroniclers, left descriptions that sound almost fantastical. The gardens were said to rise in a series of terraces, each level planted with trees, shrubs, and vines. Water allegedly flowed upward through an ingenious system of pumps and channels, creating a lush oasis in the middle of a desert city. One story tells that Nebuchadnezzar II built them for his queen, Amines, who longed for the green hills of her homeland. It was meant as a gift, a gesture of devotion and comfort, blending nature with human ingenuity. The engineering ideas behind the gardens are fascinating. Scholars and archaeologists have speculated about how the Babylonians might have lifted water hundreds of feet to irrigate each terrace. Some suggest chain pumps, others a series of aqueducts, and some even imagine water wheels powered by slaves or animals. The gardens were more than decoration. They would have required extraordinary planning, careful water management, and constant maintenance. If they truly existed, they would have been a feat rivaling anything else in the ancient world. Yet, despite these detailed accounts, no archaeological evidence has definitively proven their existence. Excavations in Babylon have revealed impressive walls, gates, and palaces, but the terraces and hydraulic systems described in ancient texts have yet to be conclusively found. Some scholars argue that the gardens might have been located elsewhere, perhaps in Nineveh, the Assyrian capital, and later attributed to Babylon through stories. Others suggest that they existed, but were lost entirely to time, destroyed by floods, erosion, or human activity over millennia. Arguments against the gardens' existence are compelling. Babylon was a city built primarily of mud brick, which deteriorates quickly in wet conditions. Maintaining massive terraces with flowing water on mud brick foundations would have been extremely difficult. Ancient engineers were skilled, yes, but some historians question whether such a feat was possible at the scale described. Perhaps the stories were a combination of imagination, exaggeration, and admiration for Babylon's overall grandeur. Still, the legend endures. Why? Perhaps because the Hanging Gardens represent something deeper than bricks and water systems. They symbolize human ambition, ingenuity, and desire to recreate nature in the heart of a bustling city, to blend beauty and engineering, to surprise and delight. They reflect Nebuchadnezzar's vision of Babylon not only as a city of power, but also as a place where human creativity could touch the divine. Even if the terraces never truly existed, the story captures the imagination, whispering of gardens suspended in the air, an oasis of wonder in a city already remarkable. Travelers and writers centuries later continue to tell the tale, ensuring its survival. The gardens became a symbol of Babylon itself, extraordinary, inspiring, and a little beyond belief. They reminded the world that Babylon was a city where walls, temples, and markets were not enough. the imagination and artistry of humankind could leave its mark as well. The legend survived even when the city itself fell into decline, floating on the wings of memory and storytelling. The Hanging Gardens, real or imagined, reflect a broader truth about Babylon. The city inspired awe in every sense. It was not just a political or economic center. It was a place of culture, learning, devotion, and ambition. A city that aimed to impress both gods and humans. Every brick, canal, and temple already testified to human achievement. But the gardens, whether physical or mythical, added poetry to that achievement. Even the technical debates are fascinating. Ancient writers described advanced irrigation systems and terrace construction, hinting at remarkable knowledge of hydraulics. Modern engineers speculate about the challenges: lifting water hundreds of feet, preventing collapse, distributing weight evenly. In some ways, the gardens, real or imagined, represent the enduring curiosity and inventiveness of Babylonian society. They remind us that civilization is not just about survival and governance, but also about pushing the boundaries of what is possible. The myth has endured because it speaks to the human love of wonder. We are drawn to stories that combine practicality with imagination, reality with aspiration. The Hanging Gardens, whether fact or legend, embody that human desire to reach higher, to beautify, to surprise, and to comfort. They also represent the softer, emotional side of Babylon, not just conquest, trade, or law, but love, creativity, and the yearning for beauty. Historians continue to debate, archaeologists continue to dig, and the legend remains tantalizingly elusive. And perhaps that is part of the charm. Some stories are more powerful because they are never fully proven, because they invite imagination to fill the gaps, allowing each generation to picture a floating paradise in their own way. Babylon, already magnificent with walls, gates, temples, and canals, became even more enchanting through this enduring tale. The Hanging Gardens remind us that cities are not only measured by walls or wealth, but also by the dreams they inspire. Babylon's story, like the gardens, mixes history and legend, practicality and wonder, reality and aspiration. It is a city where human achievement and imagination coexist, where even the impossible seems possible, and where the past continues to captivate long after the bricks have crumbled. And yet, as with all things in Babylon, even paradise can fade. Religion, astronomy, and knowledge in Babylon was not only a city of walls, palaces, and gardens. It was also a city of the mind. Its people looked to the heavens and to the gods, blending spirituality, observation, and intellectual curiosity in ways that would influence civilizations for centuries. Religion and knowledge were intertwined, forming the backbone of Babylonian society and culture. At the heart of Babylonian life were the gods and myths that shaped the city's worldview. Marduk, the chief deity, was considered the protector of Babylon, the god who triumphed over chaos to create order. Temples to Marduk and other deities like Ishtar, Nabu, and Shamash were centers of worship, education, and administration. Priests oversaw rituals, interpreted omens, and guided citizens through moral, spiritual, and practical aspects of life. Stories of gods battling monsters, creating the world, or guiding kings provided both entertainment and ethical lessons, forming a rich tapestry of mythology that permeated daily life. Temples were more than places of worship. They were hubs of knowledge and learning. Babylonian priests acted as scholars, teachers, and astronomers. They copied and preserved texts, maintained records of trade and law, and taught reading and writing. Education was often linked to religious instruction, so learning was framed as both practical and sacred. Young scribes spent years mastering cuneiform, copying texts, and learning mathematics, astronomy, and astrology. The city's temples ensured that knowledge survived, was organized, and was transmitted across generations. One of Babylon's most remarkable contributions was astronomy and early science. Babylonian scholars meticulously observed the stars, planets, and lunar cycles. They recorded celestial movements on clay tablets, predicting eclipses, calculating the length of months, and tracking planetary positions. This knowledge was not mere curiosity. It had practical applications for agriculture, trade, and ritual. By understanding celestial patterns, Babylonians could plan planting and harvesting, navigate trade routes, and determine auspicious times for festivals and ceremonies. Astrology also played a key role. Babylonians believed that the movements of the stars and planets reflected the will of the gods and could influence human affairs. Kings consulted omens before making decisions, and citizens interpreted celestial signs to guide personal and civic life. This fusion of observation and belief created a sophisticated system. Mathematics, pattern recognition, and careful record-keeping combined with spiritual insight. The heavens became a mirror for both the gods' intentions and human planning, reflecting the deep connection between the cosmos and Babylonian society. Calendars were another vital achievement. Babylonian astronomers developed lunar calendars, dividing the year into months based on moon cycles. Intercalary months were occasionally added to keep the calendar aligned with the seasons. Festivals, religious rituals, and civic events depended on this precise tracking of time. For citizens, life followed the rhythm of the calendar, planting, harvesting, celebrating, and worshiping, all coordinated with the cycles of nature and the cosmos. Babylonian calendars laid the groundwork for later systems used by Greeks, Romans, and other civilizations, a quiet but lasting legacy. Mathematics and record-keeping were also central to intellectual life. Priests and scribes developed sophisticated arithmetic and geometry to manage land, trade, and construction projects. Clay tablets reveal detailed calculations for areas, volumes, and accounting. Architecture, canals, and urban planning benefited from these skills, demonstrating the practical application of knowledge. Babylonian mathematics and astronomy influenced neighboring civilizations, seeding ideas that would spread across the ancient world. Babylon's intellectual achievements were deeply tied to religion and ritual. Temples served as observatories, schools, and libraries. Priests interpreted signs from the gods through both celestial and terrestrial phenomena. Knowledge was not abstract. It had practical, spiritual, and civic purposes. Every calculation, every observation, every record had meaning, guiding both the city and the empire. Babylon's intellectual life reflected a balance between curiosity and reverence, combining scientific observation with devotion and moral guidance. These accomplishments had lasting influence. Greek scholars later drew on Babylonian astronomical tables. The concept of dividing the circle into 360 degrees and the base 60 number system originated in Mesopotamia. calendars, timekeeping, and early scientific methods all trace back to Babylonian innovation. Even myths and religious concepts shaped literature and philosophy in the wider ancient world. Babylon's intellectual legacy endured long after its political power faded, a quiet but profound echo of its greatness. Life in Babylon intertwined faith, observation, and learning. Citizens followed festivals, consulted priests, and observed the stars. Farmers relied on the calendar to sow and harvest. Merchants used arithmetic to manage trade. Kings used omens and astrological signs to guide decisions. Religion, science, and daily life were woven together in a seamless fabric, creating a society where knowledge was both practical and sacred. Every action aligned with the cycles of nature, the will of the gods, and the wisdom of the past. Babylonian knowledge was both structured and dynamic. The priests' careful records allowed for continuity, while observations encouraged new insights. When eclipses or planetary movements didn't match expectations, scholars adjusted calculations, blending empirical observation with established tradition. This approach reflects a civilization deeply committed to learning, yet respectful of the order and meaning they attributed to the universe. The city's intellectual achievements also reinforced its cultural identity. Babylonians knew that their gods had chosen them, that their kings were divinely guided, and that their knowledge connected them to the cosmos. This sense of purpose encouraged stability, innovation, and devotion. Temples, libraries, and observatories became more than physical structures. They were symbols of Babylon's enduring wisdom and its ambition to understand both human life and the universe. Yet, as with all powerful civilizations, Babylon's intellectual and cultural achievements existed alongside human flaws. The city's laws, innovations, and religious practices were intertwined with politics and control. Knowledge could be used to maintain order, support authority, and guide conquest. As the city grew in pride and confidence, the risk of arrogance and hubris increased. Babylonian scholars and kings were aware of the heavens, but the very awareness of their own accomplishments sometimes overshadowed caution. Even so, Babylon's pursuit of understanding left a lasting legacy. Astronomy, mathematics, astrology, law, and religion all flowed from this fertile intellectual environment. Centuries later, civilizations would draw on Babylonian knowledge to develop their own science, literature, and philosophy. Babylon's walls and gates might crumble, its palaces fade, and its gardens vanish, but the wisdom it nurtured endured. And yet, history has a pattern. Civilizations rise, achieve greatness, and eventually face challenges. Babylon's knowledge, culture, and religion flourished, but power breeds arrogance, the slow decline, weak kings, and growing threats after the legendary reign of Nebuchadnezzar II. Babylon entered a period of change, one that was quieter on the surface but dangerous underneath. The city that had once been nearly invincible now faced weak kings, political instability, and growing external threats. Life inside the walls continued. Markets still bustled, festivals were still celebrated, temples still rang with devotion, but the golden glow of power was fading. Nebuchadnezzar's successors could never quite match his vision or strength. Some were capable administrators, others were indecisive or easily manipulated. Court intrigue became common. Ministers and advisors vied for influence. Rival factions formed, and succession disputes weakened the central authority. Kings came and went, each leaving a smaller imprint than the one before. The city, once unified under a strong ruler, began to show cracks in its leadership. Political instability brought challenges to both governance and public life. Laws remained, scribes continued their work, and priests maintained their rituals, but decision-making slowed. Large construction projects were delayed or abandoned. Defense, while still formidable, suffered from neglect in places. Internal disputes and palace intrigues sapped energy from the state, making it harder for Babylon to respond quickly to external pressures. Citizens, used to strong leadership, began to sense vulnerability. Religious tensions also emerged during this period. Babylon had always been deeply spiritual, and the city's wealth and influence were closely tied to devotion to its gods. But different temples and priesthoods sometimes clashed over priorities, resources, or ritual practices. Kings, trying to maintain balance, occasionally favored one deity or sect over another, creating friction. While Babylon remained proud of its traditions, these internal religious conflicts subtly weakened the social cohesion that had sustained it through centuries of challenges. Meanwhile, the Persian Empire was rising to the east. Under the leadership of ambitious rulers, Persia expanded steadily, absorbing neighboring kingdoms and consolidating power. Unlike previous enemies, the Persians combined military strength with clever administration, forming a centralized state capable of projecting influence over vast distances. Their rise was slow but relentless, and Babylon, despite its history of resilience, could not ignore the shadow growing on its eastern horizon. Babylon's defenses remained impressive, but the city was vulnerable once again. Years of internal instability, coupled with complacency from long periods without direct threat, made it less agile in responding to new dangers. Canals still brought water, markets still hummed, and temples still celebrated rituals. But the strategic edge that had once made Babylon nearly untouchable was slipping. The city that had withstood Hittites, Assyrians, and internal rebellions was facing a foe that could exploit its weaknesses carefully and patiently. The slow decline of Babylon was not dramatic. It was not the crash of walls or the roar of invading armies. Those would come later. Instead, it was a quiet erosion of strength. Kings struggled to enforce policies, religious conflicts simmered, and citizens began to recognize that the city's era of unparalleled power was waning. Life continued, but the city's energy, decisiveness, and cohesion were diminishing. This period also saw Babylon's famed intellectual and cultural achievements persist even as political power waned. Priests continued to study the stars, scribes copied texts, and festivals were celebrated with devotion. Yet, without strong kings to unify the city, these achievements became a form of cultural endurance rather than political dominance. Babylon's brilliance remained, but it was increasingly overshadowed by the ambitions of neighboring powers. As Persian power grew, Babylon's rulers faced a difficult choice: resist, negotiate, or risk being overtaken. Their previous experience with strong external powers, the Assyrians and earlier rivals, offered lessons, but centuries of comfort and wealth may have dulled the city's instinct for urgent action. The walls and gates that had once protected the city from nearly every enemy were formidable, yet no walls could compensate for weak leadership and divided priorities. The city's population, while loyal and proud, was also aware of the changing world. Traders, farmers, and citizens observed the rise of Persia with curiosity and apprehension. Rumors of Persian campaigns, alliances, and conquests circulated through the markets and streets. Every day, the Euphrates carried not just water but whispers of a shifting balance of power in the region. Babylon, ancient and wise, could sense the coming storm long before it arrived. Even with its challenges, Babylon's legacy of learning, religion, and culture persisted. The city remained a hub for priests, astronomers, and scribes. Its temples continued to host festivals, rituals, and study. Citizens maintained traditions passed down from centuries of kings, scholars, and builders. The heart of the city still beat with knowledge and devotion, but the pulse of political power was weakening. Ultimately, this period of slow decline set the stage for a dramatic confrontation. Babylon's walls, gates, and canals were still imposing. Its culture, religion, and knowledge were unmatched. But weak kings, internal divisions, and the rise of a formidable Persian empire made the city increasingly vulnerable. History, it seemed, was preparing to test Babylon one final time. And so, as the city continued its daily rhythms, markets bustling, canals flowing, priests performing rituals, there was an unmistakable sense that change was coming. The once mighty city, proud and resilient, faced a new reality. Strength without unity and wealth without vigilance could not last forever. Babylon, magnificent though it was at a crossroads. From the east, a new empire approached, Cyrus the Great, and the fall of Babylon. Babylon, ancient and magnificent, had withstood centuries of rulers, invasions, and internal strife. Its walls were immense, its gates adorned with colorful reliefs, and its temples reached for the heavens. Yet, after centuries of glory, the city faced a new challenge. A rising empire from the east, led by a man whose name would be remembered as one of history's greatest conquerors, Cyrus the Great. Cyrus had built the Persian Empire with a combination of military skill, diplomacy, and strategic thinking. Unlike previous invaders, he was known for integrating conquered peoples rather than destroying them. His empire stretched across vast territories, and his reputation for fairness and pragmatism preceded him. When he turned his attention toward Babylon, the city faced a threat unlike any it had encountered before, a threat that was both formidable and subtle. The Persians approached Babylon carefully, planning their strategy with patience and intelligence. Rather than storming the city with brute force, Cyrus relied on clever tactics, understanding the city's weaknesses and the discontent within. Babylon's own rivers, canals, and gates, once sources of pride and defense, became part of the strategy. According to historical accounts, the Euphrates played a crucial role in the city's capture. By diverting the river or using its flow strategically, Cyrus's forces could enter the city quietly, bypassing the walls that had withstood countless sieges over the centuries. In 539 BCE, the moment arrived. Babylon was taken but not destroyed. Unlike previous conquerors, Cyrus recognized the city's value and its people. Temples, palaces, and walls were left intact. Citizens awoke to find their city under new rule, yet still standing, still vibrant, still home. Babylon's wealth, culture, and knowledge were preserved, but its independence had ended. The city, once the proud center of an empire, now became a part of the Persian realm. This capture was remarkable not only for its military success, but for its calm and calculated approach. Cyrus's strategy emphasized preservation over destruction, integration over obliteration. Babylon's streets, canals, markets, and temples continued their daily rhythms even as the city changed hands. Farmers tended their fields, merchants sold their goods, priests maintained rituals, and citizens continued their lives under new authority but without chaos or ruin. The fall of Babylon marked the end of its independence, a quiet turning point in history. Centuries of kings, builders, and scholars had made the city mighty, but even the greatest empires are subject to change. Babylon had risen from small beginnings, survived internal strife, experienced golden ages, and withstood enemies. Yet, time and the rise of new powers had brought the city to a new chapter, one of continuity under foreign rule rather than self-determined glory. Despite the loss of independence, Babylon's cultural and intellectual legacy endured. Temples continued to honor the gods, scribes preserved their texts, astronomers studied the heavens, and festivals celebrated both the city's history and the rhythms of life. Cyrus's respect for Babylonian culture allowed the city to maintain its identity in many ways, even under the umbrella of a larger empire. Its knowledge, religion, and traditions persisted, quietly influencing the broader Persian realm. The transition was dramatic in historical terms, yet calm in experience for many citizens. There was no wholesale destruction, no bloodshed filling the streets. Babylon's people witnessed a change of rulers, but the city itself, the walls, gates, temples, palaces, and canals, remained intact. Daily life continued, and for those living within the city, the shift was experienced more as a new chapter than a sudden collapse. Cyrus's conquest also demonstrated a broader lesson about empire and power. Strength and grandeur are impressive, but flexibility, diplomacy, and foresight can achieve results that brute force cannot. Babylon, with all its walls, defenses, and might, had been taken not by storm, but by strategy and wisdom. In this way, the city's end as an independent power was both a triumph of Persian ingenuity and a testament to Babylon's enduring significance, valuable enough to be preserved rather than destroyed. The legacy of Babylon continued to resonate even as political control shifted. Scholars, priests, and citizens carried forward traditions of astronomy, law, religion, and learning. The city's temples continued to inspire devotion, and its streets remained vibrant with commerce and conversation. Babylon's name, walls, gates, and gardens would echo through history as symbols of human achievement, ingenuity, and ambition. Even under Persian rule, the city retained its unique identity and charm. Cyrus's approach ensured that Babylon's transition from independent empire to part of the Persian Empire was remarkably peaceful. There was no mass destruction of temples or palaces. Markets remained active, and scholars continued their studies. The Euphrates, once a lifeline and a defensive tool, now symbolized continuity as it flowed through a city adapting to a new ruler. Babylon had survived centuries of turmoil, and even as its political power faded, its cultural and intellectual heart continued to beat. Yet the fall marked the end of Babylonian sovereignty, a reminder that even the greatest cities and empires face cycles of rise and decline. The kings, builders, and scholars who had shaped Babylon over centuries had created a legacy of grandeur, knowledge, and resilience. But history moves forward, and the Persian Empire now dictated the fate of the city. Babylon would live on, respected and preserved, yet no longer the master of its own destiny. In the grand sweep of history, Babylon's story is one of remarkable endurance. It rose from humble beginnings, grew into a city of walls, gates, temples, and gardens, achieved golden ages under kings like Hammurabi and Nebuchadnezzar, and inspired wonder across the ancient world. Its knowledge, religion, and culture outlasted invasions and political changes. And even in its fall to Cyrus, the city's essence, its streets, markets, canals, and temples, remained a living reminder of what human civilization can achieve. The capture of Babylon by Cyrus the Great symbolizes both an end and a continuation. Independence had ended, yet life, culture, and knowledge persisted. The city's stones, waters, and traditions continue to tell stories of glory, ambition, and resilience. Future generations would look back on Babylon as a place of wonder, ingenuity, and achievement, even if it no longer ruled the region. Babylon had faced empires before, and it would face more after. But its influence, its intellectual achievements, and its legends, palaces, walls, gates, and even the mysterious hanging gardens, endured far beyond its political control. The city had become more than a capital. It was a symbol of human aspiration, creativity, and resilience. And so, after centuries of rise, conquest, and renewal, Babylon lived on. But never as before Babylon under foreign rule after Cyrus the Great took control in 539 BCE. Babylon entered a new phase, one of survival rather than sovereignty. The city, once the capital of empires and the jewel of Mesopotamia, now found itself under foreign rule. Life continued within the walls. The canals still flowed, markets still bustled, temples still echoed with devotion. But the pulse of political power had shifted. Babylon was no longer the master of its fate. Under Persian rule, the city retained a surprising amount of importance. The Persians valued Babylon for its culture, knowledge, and infrastructure. Temples continued to function, scribes maintained records, and scholars studied the stars. Administrative duties now aligned with the broader Persian Empire, but Babylon's role as a center of learning and religion remained intact. Life inside the walls was a mixture of continuity and adaptation. Citizens adapted to new rulers while preserving familiar customs. Yet over time, the grandeur of independence slowly faded. Persian governors controlled the city, and while they respected Babylonian traditions, the city no longer set its own policies. Festivals, markets, and religious ceremonies continued, but decisions about defense, trade, and governance were increasingly influenced by the Persian court. The kings of Babylon, who had once embodied authority and divine favor, were now distant memories, their palaces and monuments reminders of a time when the city determined its own destiny. Centuries later, the city faced another dramatic shift under the arrival of Alexander the Great. In 331 BCE, the Macedonian conqueror reached Babylon, drawn by its history, wealth, and legend. Unlike some conquerors, Alexander admired the city's magnificence. He attempted to maintain its structures, support local priests, and even dreamed of restoring Babylon to its former glory. For a time, the city experienced a revival of sorts, restoration of temples, festivals, and civic life, but these efforts were short-lived. Alexander's sudden death in 323 BCE left the city without a champion, and political instability returned. Attempts to restore Babylon under later rulers were limited. While the city remained inhabited and functioned as a regional center, its significance gradually declined. Trade routes shifted, Populations moved and administrative priorities changed. Canals silted, walls began to crumble, and buildings that had once been symbols of power slowly fell into disrepair. The city's fame persisted in stories and memory, but its reality was one of quiet decline. By the 1st centuries BCE, Babylon's great streets and towering temples were only partially occupied. Neighborhoods shrank, canals were less maintained, and some areas became deserted. The once bustling processional way saw fewer parades. The Ishtar Gate loomed over quieter streets, and the hanging gardens, if they had truly existed, were long gone. Yet even in decay, the city retained a sense of awe. Travelers and historians marveled at its walls and remnants, recounting tales of kings, gardens, and temples that seemed almost impossible to forget. Sand and silence gradually claimed parts of the city. Nature crept back where human hands once ruled. Winds swept across open courtyards, covering streets with dust. Canals became narrower, overgrown, and eventually dried in sections. The city's physical presence diminished, yet its imprint on human memory remained strong. Babylon had transformed from a bustling metropolis into a place where history and legend coexisted with the slow advance of time. Despite its decline, the legacy of Babylon persisted in multiple ways. Its laws influenced later civilizations, its astronomy informed Greek scholars, and its architecture inspired future builders. Religious practices, myths, and stories continued to circulate across the region. Even abandoned walls and broken gates served as silent teachers, reminding those who came later of the heights human civilization could reach. Babylon's memory, carefully preserved in texts and tales, resisted total disappearance. Life in Babylon under foreign rule was simpler yet persistent. Citizens tended their homes and gardens, visited remaining temples, and conducted trade along familiar routes. Festivals and rituals still marked the calendar, though on a smaller scale. Scholars continued their observations of the heavens, passing on knowledge from generation to generation. Babylon's culture endured quietly, a shadow of its former grandeur but remarkably resilient. The decline of Babylon was gradual, not sudden. Unlike cities destroyed by conquest, Babylon faded slowly, giving way to time, shifting trade and changing politics. Its people adapted. The city continued to function in a diminished form, and history preserved its stories. Temples, walls, gates, and canals remained as reminders of a city that had once been unmatched in power, beauty, and influence. By the time of the early Common Era, much of Babylon had been abandoned. Sand-filled streets, once grand buildings crumbled, and nature slowly reclaimed the land. Yet even in silence, the city continued to speak. Archaeologists centuries later would uncover bricks, inscriptions, and foundations that told tales of kings, gardens, temples, and canals. Babylon's story was encoded in every fragment of its ruins. This period under foreign rule emphasizes a lesson that echoes through history. Greatness is fragile, yet enduring in memory. Political power may fade, empires may rise and fall, and cities may decline physically. But the cultural, intellectual, and spiritual achievements of a civilization can persist far longer than walls, gates, or palaces. Babylon exemplifies this truth. Even as the city's streets grew quiet and its canals slowed, the legend of Babylon never disappeared. Travelers, historians, and later civilizations recounted its stories, its golden ages, mighty kings, and extraordinary constructions. Tales of Hammurabi's laws, Nebuchadnezzar's palaces, and the Hanging Gardens continue to inspire awe. The city, though diminished, remained present in the imagination of the world. And so, centuries of foreign rule transformed Babylon from a center of empire into a shadow of its former glory, a city of memory rather than power. Its walls, gates, and temples persisted as silent witnesses to history. Its canals, once the lifeblood of civilization, gradually narrowed and filled with sand. Markets and neighborhoods shrank, yet in the minds of those who heard its stories, Babylon remained magnificent, eternal, and unforgettable. Yet Babylon was never truly forgotten, the legacy of Babylon. Memory, myth, and meaning even as its walls crumbled, canals filled with sand and palaces fell silent. Babylon never truly disappeared from the human imagination. Long after its political power faded, the city lived on in stories, myths, religious texts, and the collective memory of countless civilizations. Its name conjured images of grandeur, mystery, and human achievement. From the earliest scribes to modern historians, Babylon has fascinated people, quietly reminding us of both the heights we can reach and the fragility of power. In the centuries that followed, Babylon became a symbol in religious texts and literature. The Bible references Babylon numerous times, painting it as a place of both splendor and caution. Stories of its grandeur and decadence, of kings and conquests, serve as moral and spiritual lessons. The city represented human ambition, divine favor, and at times hubris. Through these texts, Babylon entered the imagination of cultures far from Mesopotamia, becoming an enduring metaphor for civilization itself, its brilliance, its dangers, and its fleeting nature. Beyond myth and literature, Babylon left concrete marks on law, science, and urban development. Hammurabi's code influenced legal systems for centuries, shaping ideas about justice, fairness, and social responsibility. Babylonian astronomy laid foundations for the study of stars and planets, inspiring Greek and later civilizations in mathematics, timekeeping, and calendars. Its architecture, the ziggurats, walls, gates, and city planning, offered models for urban development. Even in decline, Babylon's intellectual and cultural achievements echoed far beyond the borders of Mesopotamia. Babylon also reminds us that civilizations are built on vision and persistence. From its humble beginnings along the Tigris and Euphrates to its golden ages, the city shows what careful planning, ambition, and organization can achieve. Canals supplied water to fields and neighborhoods. Temples nurtured religion and knowledge. Walls protected citizens, and markets fueled commerce. Through these systems, Babylon became more than a collection of buildings. It became a living organism, a city where human ingenuity thrived alongside culture, art, and science. Yet Babylon's story also teaches us about impermanence. No matter how strong the walls or wise the kings, no city lasts forever. Political instability, changing empires, and time itself eventually eroded Babylon's independence and physical prominence. The mighty city that had once controlled Mesopotamia fell quietly under Persian rule, then Greek influence, and slowly into obscurity. Its streets became silent, and sand began to reclaim the canals and courtyards. The city's decline is a gentle reminder that all things, even empires, move in cycles of rise and fall. Perhaps part of what makes Babylon so captivating is this balance between reality and legend. Archaeologists uncover fragments of walls and inscriptions, confirming its grandeur, while tales of the Hanging Gardens or Nebuchadnezzar's magnificent palaces stretch into myth. This combination of fact and story invites imagination. Visitors long after Babylon's decline could picture the bustling markets, the echoing temples, and the verdant gardens that may or may not have existed. Through this interplay of memory and myth, Babylon continues to live vividly in our minds. Babylon also illustrates the human desire to reach higher, both literally and metaphorically. Ziggurats rose toward the heavens, gardens hung above courtyards, and astronomers studied the stars. Kings and citizens alike sought to understand the world, to beautify it, and to leave a lasting mark. The city became a symbol of ambition and creativity, a testament to what people can achieve when imagination, organization, and effort come together. Even in ruins, this spirit remains tangible. There is a quiet lesson in Babylon's enduring influence. Achievements may outlast rulers, walls, and empires. Though the city no longer controls vast territories, and though its streets are mostly sand and rubble, its knowledge, culture, and stories persist. Its laws informed civilizations far away. Its myths inspired countless generations, and its architectural ideas influenced urban planning long after the Ziggurats fell. Babylon's legacy is not in conquest alone, but in the ideas, wisdom, and creativity it shared with the world. Even today, we are drawn to Babylon not just for what it was, but for what it represents. A city of ambition and ingenuity, of intellect and artistry, it continues to inspire awe. Historians, writers, artists, and travelers return to its story again and again, exploring how humans can build, innovate, and imagine. Babylon reminds us of the beauty of creation, the importance of learning, and the fleeting nature of even the mightiest achievements. In reflecting on Babylon, we are reminded to look at the world with both admiration and humility. The city reached extraordinary heights, yet it also fell under the weight of time and circumstance. Its story is not merely one of kings and conquests, but of people. Farmers, scribes, priests, traders whose lives built a civilization that still echoes today. There is comfort in this memory, that even as civilizations rise and fall, human endeavor leaves traces that persist in culture, knowledge, and imagination. As night falls over the plains of Mesopotamia, imagine the city once more. Canals glistening in the moonlight, the ziggurats rising into the stars, markets filled with chatter, and temples alive with devotion. The hum of life may be quiet now, but the city's spirit lingers. Its lessons, myths, and wonders continue to travel across time, connecting the past to the present. In this way, Babylon is never truly gone. It exists wherever we remember, imagine, and reflect. Babylon's legacy is both a comfort and a contemplation. It reminds us of the heights humans can reach when vision and effort combine. It also reminds us to cherish the present, knowing that even the mightiest creations are temporary. And perhaps most importantly, it allows us to drift into reflection, thinking of cities, empires, and lives as part of a broader, ever-changing story. So, as you imagine the flowing canals, towering ziggurats, bustling streets, and perhaps the legendary gardens, allow yourself to feel the calm presence of history. Babylon teaches that civilization is built on curiosity, creativity, and connection, and that even when walls crumble, knowledge fades, and empires fall, the memory of human endeavor endures. And in this quiet reflection, we leave Babylon not as a fallen city, not as ruins reclaimed by sand, but as a living story, a memory, and a wonder of the world.